I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hello, good patriots. I'm Face, and these are the histories that America forgot. According to Wikipedia, quote, "The Battle of Bladensberg was a battle of the Chesapeake Campaign during the War of 1812, fought on the 24th of August, 1814, at Bladensberg, Maryland, 8.6 miles northeast of Washington, D.C. Called, quote, the greatest disgrace ever dealt to American arms, end quote. A British force of Army regulars and Royal Marines routed a combined U.S. force of regular Army and state militia troops. The American defeat resulted in the capture and burning of the national capital of Washington, D.C., the only time the city fell to a foreign invader. For the first 2 years of the War of 1812, the British had been preoccupied with the war against Napoleon and his French Empire, France, in Europe. However, warships of the Royal Navy led by Rear Admiral George Cockburn, second in command of the North American station, controlled Chesapeake Bay from early 1813 onwards, and had captured large numbers of U.S. trading vessels. They occupied Tangier Island off the coast of Virginia, establishing Fort Albion as an anchorage and staging area. As many as 1,200 British soldiers would be stationed there. Raiding parties had destroyed foundries and batteries and sacked several small towns, but lack of troops restricted Cockburn to mounting small-scale raids, the largest of which was the Battle of Craney Island in the Hampton Roads Harbor near Norfolk, Virginia, which involved 2,000 men of the British Army and the Royal Marines. Although Cockburn withdrew from Chesapeake Bay late in 1813, his sailors had taken soundings and even placed buoys to mark channels and sandbars in preparation for a renewed campaign in 1814. By April 1814, Napoleon had been defeated and was exiled to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy, and large numbers of British troops and ships were now free to be used to persecute the former backwater war with the United States. As part of the measures taken to prosecute the war more vigorously, Admiral Sir John Burleigh's Warren was replaced as Commander-in-Chief of the North American Station by Vice Admiral Sir Alexander Cochrane, who was a more active and experienced officer, who often expressed his rancor with the United States. Most of the newly available troops went to the continental colonies of British North America, where Lieutenant General Sir George Prevost, who was Captain-in-General and the Governor-in-Chief in and over the provinces of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, was preparing to lead an invasion into New York from the Canadas, heading for Lake Champlain and the Upper Hudson River. However, the Earl of Bathurst, Secretary of State for War and the Colonies, dispatched a brigade of 2,500 soldiers, mainly veterans from the Duke of Wellington's army and commanded by Major General Robert Ross, to the imperial fortress of Bermuda, from where a blockade of the U.S. coast and even the occupation of some coastal islands had been overseen throughout the war. Ross's brigade arrived there aboard HMS Royal Oak, 3 frigates, 3 sloops, and 10 other vessels. The intention was for this force to carry out raids on the Atlantic seaboard to, quote, effect a diversion on the coasts of the United States of America in favor of the army employed in the defense of Upper and Lower Canada, end quote. Meanwhile, Albert Gallatin, President James Madison's nominated commissioner for negotiations with the British government, sent news from Europe of Napoleon's abdication and the apparent hardening of British attitudes toward the United States. On the 1st of July, 1814, Madison summoned his cabinet to discuss the increased threat to the United States Atlantic coast, including Washington, although the Secretary of War John Armstrong insisted that the British would not attack Washington, since it was strategically unimportant. He felt the most likely target would be the city of Baltimore, which offered more commercial targets and plunder than Washington. Armstrong was half right. The British would attack against Baltimore and Washington. Nevertheless, on the 2nd of July, Madison designated the area around Washington and Baltimore as the United States Army's 10th Military District, and without consulting Armstrong, appointed Brigadier General William H. Winder as its commander. Winder was the nephew of Levin Winder, Federalist governor of Maryland. He had practiced law in Baltimore before being commissioned as a colonel in 1812, and had only recently been exchanged after having been captured at the Battle of Stony Creek in July 1813. On the 5th of July, he and Armstrong conferred. Winder suggested calling up some militia in advance of any attack, but Armstrong insisted that militia could best be used at the spur of the moment. Winder spent a month visiting the forts and settlements in his new command. Armstrong did not provide him with any staff, and despite his fears that the British could launch an attack against almost any point, with very little warning, Winder did not order any field fortifications to be constructed, nor make any other preparations. Although Major General Ross commanded the British troops in Chesapeake Bay, the point of attack was to be decided by Vice Admiral Cochrane, who had concentrated 4 ships of the line, 20 frigates and sloops of war, and 20 transports carrying Ross's troops at Tangier Island. Rear Admiral Cockburn, Cochrane's second-in-command, favored a quick attack on Washington, but Ross was not eager. His men had been confined aboard their transport for nearly 3 months, and he lacked cavalry, artillery, and transport. Ross was also wary of the U.S. Chesapeake Bay flotilla, 3 gunboats and 10 gun-armed barges, lurking in the Patuxent River. His first objective had to be to capture or to destroy the U.S. flotilla. Cochrane dispatched 2 forces to make diversions. The frigate HMS Menelaus and some small craft threatened a raid on Baltimore, while 2 frigates and some bomb ketches, and a rocket vessel ascended on the Potomac River. An expedition that resulted in the successful raid on Alexandria. His main body proceeded into the Patuxent. Ross's troops landed at Benedict on the 19th of August and began marching upstream the following day, while Cockburn proceeded up the river with ships, boats, and small craft. By the 21st of August, Ross had reached Nottingham, and Commodore Joshua Barney was forced to destroy the gunboats and other sailing craft of the Chesapeake Bay flotilla the next day, and retreat overland towards Washington. From Nottingham, Ross continued up the Patuxent to Upper Marlborough, where he could threaten to advance on either Washington or Baltimore, confusing the Americans. He might have taken the capital almost unopposed had he advanced on the 23rd of August, but instead he rested his men and organized his force. On the night of the 23rd and 24th of August, at the urging of Rear Admiral Cockburn and some of the British Army officers under his own command, Ross decided to risk an attack on Washington. He had 4 infantry battalions, a battalion of Royal Marines, a force of about 200 men, and the Corps of Colonial Marines, which was composed of locally recruited black refugees from slavery, a Congreve rocket detachment from the Royal Marines Battalion, 50 Royal sappers and miners, 100 gunners from the Navy, and 275 sailors to carry supplies. His force totaled 4,370 men, with 1 6-pounder gun, 2 3-pounder guns, and 60 launchers, each being attached to a rocket. Rear Admiral Cockburn accompanied this force. Ross had a choice of 2 routes by which he could advance, from the south via Woodyard or from the east via Bladensberg. The former route would involve finding a new way across an unfordable part of the eastern branch of the Potomac, now called the Anacostia River, if the U.S. destroyed the bridge on the route. In the morning of the 24th of August, Ross made a feint on the southern route before suddenly swerving northwards toward Bladensberg. In Washington, Brigadier General Winder could call in theory upon 15,000 militia, but he actually only had 120 dragoons and 300 other regulars, plus 1,500 poorly trained and under-equipped militiamen at his immediate disposal. On the 20th of August, Winder ordered this force to advance south towards Long Old Fields and Woodyard, off modern Route 5, to confront the British forces at Upper Marlborough. After a brief clash with Ross's leading units on the 22nd of August, Winder ordered a hasty retreat to the Long Old Fields. He feared that the British might make a surprise attack at night, in which the British would hold the advantage in organization and discipline, while Winder's own advantage in artillery would count for little. Winder had been captured in just such a night attack at Stony Creek the year before. Although he rode with the forces directly shooting the British invaders, Winder realized that Bladensberg was the key to Washington's defense. Bladensberg commanded the roads to Baltimore and Annapolis, along which reinforcements were moving to join him. The town also lay on one of the only 2 routes available for the British to advance on Washington. In fact, the preferred route, because the eastern branch was easy to ford there. On the 20th of August, Winder had ordered Brigadier General Tobias Stansbury to move from Baltimore to Bladensberg. Quote, "Take the best position in advance of Bladensberg, and should he be attacked, to resist as long as possible." End quote. On the 22nd of August, Stansbury deployed his force on Loudon's Hill, where he hastily dug earthworks for artillery emplacements. The road from Annapolis crossed the hill, and the road from Upper Marlborough ran to its south and west. Furthermore, the roads to Washington, Georgetown, and Baltimore all intersected between it and Bladensberg. From this position, Stansbury dominated the approaches available to the British, while controlling the lines of communication. At 2:30 a.m. on the 23rd of August, Stansbury received a message from Winder that he had withdrawn across the eastern branch and he intended to fire the lower bridge. Surprised, Stansbury was seized by an irrational fear that his right flank could be turned. Instead of strengthening his commanding position, he immediately decamped and marched his exhausted troops across Bladensberg Bridge, which he did not burn, to a brickyard 1.5 miles further on. He had just thrown away almost every tactical advantage available to him. Meanwhile, in Washington, every government department was hastily packing its records and evacuating them to Maryland or Virginia, in requisitioned or hired carts or riverboats. Winder now had at least 1,000 regulars from the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, and U.S. Marine Corps, plus about 7,000 less than dependable militia and volunteers from the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. Official reports of his strength range from 5,000 to 9,000 men. Winder's report to the Secretary of War stated that he was able, quote, "by the most active and harassing movement of the troops to interpose before the enemy at Bladensberg about 5,000, end quote. Ross, the British commander, estimated the American force at between 8,000 and 9,000 men, with 300 to 400 cavalry. From other contemporary sources, the forces available for the defense of Washington probably numbered around 7,170, of which 6,370 were at Bladensberg. Stansbury's force consisted of the 1st, Reagan's, 2nd, Schutz's, and 5th, Sterrett's regiments of Maryland militia, 3 companies of volunteer riflemen commanded by Major William Pinckney, a former United States Attorney General, and 2 companies of Baltimore artillery with 6 6-pounder guns. Reagan's and Schutz's regiments were hastily organized amalgamations of companies, all without uniforms. Sterrett's 5th Maryland Regiment was, quote, a dandy regiment of ununiformed volunteers. Stansbury chose a defensible position, though hardly the best one available, on the west side of the East Branch of the Potomac, opposite the town of Bladensberg. The artillery was posted in an earthwork hastily constructed by Colonel Decius Wadsworth, the Army's Commissary General of Ordnance, to the north of the bridge. The earthwork had been designed for heavier weapons, and the 6-pounder field guns had a restricted field of fire through its embrasures. They could not use oblique fire to prevent the bridge from being seized. The Maryland militia infantry regiments were posted in a line of battle south of the earthwork, too far away to protect the artillery, and exposed to British fire. Both Winder and Secretary of State James Monroe later tinkered with Stansbury's depositions. Monroe moved companies and detachments without correcting the major faults in Stansbury's position, while Winder moved the 3 militia regiments into even more exposed positions behind the Baltimore Artillery's redoubt, though Monroe reinforced them with a militia artillery company under Captain Benjamin Birch. Monroe also ordered the 120 U.S. Dragoons under Colonel Jacint Laval to occupy a ravine behind Stansbury's infantry, but left them without further orders or information. Behind Stansbury's troops and to his right was a brigade of District of Columbia militia under Brigadier General Walter Smith, which had marched from Long Old Fields. Smith's brigade was strongly posted behind a creek and along the crest of some rising ground, but Smith had not conferred with Stansbury before deploying his brigade, and there was a gap of a mile between them. Smith's men would be unable to support Stansbury, and if Stansbury were overcome, Smith's left flank would be open to attack. A battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Kramer lined the creek. Joshua Barney's men, with 2 18-pounder guns and 3 12-pounder guns, drawn from the Washington Navy Yard, were posted astride the Washington Turnpike. Barney had originally been posted to guard the lower bridge over the eastern branch and destroy it if necessary, but he had pleaded to President Madison and the Secretary of the Navy that he and his men were needed where the action was. To Barney's left was the 1st Regiment of District Militia, a militia artillery company under Major George Peter, with 6 6-pounder guns and a provisional battalion of regulars under Lieutenant Colonel William Scott. The 2nd District Militia were posted behind Peter and Scott. To Smith's right rear in turn was a column of Maryland militia under Colonel William Beall, who had just arrived from Annapolis. A regiment of Virginia militia under Colonel George Minor was delayed by administrative confusion and arrived on the field only as the battle ended. Minor's men had arrived in Washington without arms or ammunition. Minor prevailed on Winder to order muskets to be distributed on the morning of the battle. The junior officer responsible for issuing their flints insisted that they be returned and recounted. Stansbury's troops were tired from 2 days' constant alarms and redeployments, and Smith and Beall's men were equally exhausted from having force-marched to the battlefield through a hot and humid summer day, with many diversions and unnecessary panics. Around noon on the 24th of August, Ross's army reached Bladensberg. Stansbury's tactical errors became quickly apparent. Had he held Loudon's Hill, Stansbury could have made the British approach a costly one, although this would have involved fighting with the East Branch at his back, which would not have improved his men's morale and might have been disastrous in a hasty retreat. Had he held the brick structures of Bladensberg, which were ready-made mini-fortresses, he might have embroiled Ross's troops in bloody street fighting. Because the bridge had not been burned, it had to be defended. Stansbury's infantry and artillery were posted too far from the river's edge to contest a crossing effectively. The British advance was led by Colonel William Thornton's 85th Light Infantry and the 3 light companies of the other line battalions. The Baltimore Artillery and Pinckney's riflemen stopped Thornton's first rush across the bridge. Major Harry Smith, Ross's brigade major, considered that Ross and Thornton had attacked too hastily, without waiting for other units to support Thornton or sending forward skirmishers across the fords to cover the advance. However, Thornton's men eventually established themselves on the south bank of the river and began advancing in loose order. The Baltimore artillery had solid shot only, which was of little use against scattered skirmishers. Pinckney, whose elbow was shattered by a musket ball, was driven back, and as Thornton's men closed in, the Baltimore artillerymen retreated with 5 of their cannon, being forced to spike and abandon another. The British 1st 44th Regiment had meanwhile forded the east branch above the bridge. As they prepared to envelop the American left, Winder led a counterattack against Thornton by Sterrett's 5th Maryland Militia, joined by other detachments. As the 5th Maryland exchanged fire with the British infantry in cover on 3 sides, Schutz and Reagan's conscripted militia broke and fled under a barrage of rockets. Winder issued confused orders for 3 of Captain Birch's guns to fall back rather than cover Sterrett's retreat, and the 5th Maryland and the rest of Stansbury's brigade fled the field, sweeping most of Laval's horsemen with them. The British pressed on and were engaged by Smith's brigade and Barney's and Peters' guns. Thornton's light brigade made several frontal attacks over the creek, but were repulsed 3 times by artillery fire, and were counterattacked by Barney's detachment. Thornton was badly wounded, and his light infantry were driven back with heavy casualties. However, as the 1st 44th threatened Smith's open left flank, Winder ordered Smith to retreat also. Smith's brigade fell back initially in good order, but Winder's orders to retreat apparently did not reach Barney, and his situation worsened when the civilian drivers of the carts carrying his reserve ammunition joined the general rout, leaving the Marine gun crews with fewer than 3 rounds of canister, round shot and charges in their caissons. Barney's 300 sailors and 103 Marines nevertheless held off the British frontal attacks, launching counterattacks armed with hand pikes and cutlasses, with cries of, quote, "Boredom, boredom," end quote. Eventually, as the British 1st 4th and 1st 44th Regiments enveloped their left flank, Barney ordered his men to retreat to avoid capture. Barney himself was badly wounded in the thigh with a musket ball and was taken prisoner. The British later congratulated Barney for his bravery and released him. Beale's troops were also driven from the hill they held, after an ineffectual resistance. Winder had not given any instructions before the battle in case of a retreat, and as the American left the battlefield, he issued contradictory orders to halt and reform, or fall back on the capital, where Secretary of War John Armstrong, Jr. hoped vainly to make a stand, using the federal buildings as strong points, or retreat through Georgetown to Tenleytown. Most of the militia simply fled the field with no destination in mind, or deserted the ranks to see to the safety of their own families. The efforts of British Commander Robert Ross during the battle deserve praise, according to journalist Steve Vogel in his book about that era. Quote, "He conducted a brilliant campaign of deception, feigning one way or the other, marching and then doubling back, and was able to paralyze the Americans and prevent them from defending Bladensberg." End quote.
Yeah, let's go. I'm unstoppable, do the impossible. I'm irresponsible, yet I'm phenomenal. I got an arsenal, I'm dropping bombs, you know. No, I'm not stopping, no. Conquer the obstacle. To the top, here I go, think I'm chosen to be the king of rock, think the people have spoken. I can hear the tick-tock of the clock, I'm in motion. So now I'm gonna pop, causing all this commotion.
Yeah, sometimes I think that I'm unstoppable. Yeah, ready to go, man, lock and load. That's right, I swear to God that I could drop you, bro. Yeah, I got a shot and I ain't stopping, no. That's how I know that I'm unstoppable. That's how I know that I'm unstoppable. Yeah, let's go. I don't care what they all say. That's right, I'ma do this thing my way. Let's go. Been grinding hard on it all day. Okay, we work hard, then we all play. Yeah, I'm addicted to the grind, man. That's right. So I refuse to waste time, man. Yeah. One day it all will be fine, man. Let's go. Gotta commit to the climb. You know we're back with the Guinness, setting records every minute, every track, an addiction to the fact that we're winning. Still we lack, something's missing. Need a track that is hitting, making racks, making millions. If you ask, that's the mission. I don't waste time, no, I make time. All these people wanna hate, fine, I'ma make mine. While you sitting there complaining, I'll be training. While you sitting there just waiting, I'm creating.
Yeah. Sometimes I think that I'm unstoppable. Yeah.